It boils down to perspective, the perspective of being in that spot and saying, okay, well, I have this, and you will always have two opportunities in front of you no matter what. You can either be really positive or really negative, and you got to be balanced between them, but you've got to pick one or the other. Just like your brain can only handle focusing on one thing or the other. Try it. You can only be happy or you can only be sad. You can't be them both at the same time. And I'm not talking about some weird middle ground where you're just meh. That's called depression, and you actually need to talk to somebody about that. But what I'm talking about is that dichotomy there. And for your perspective to be able to be smart enough and aware enough for yourself to say, I need to just do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. I think some people have a hard time with that. So for the people that you work with, the clients that you work with, even other peers, how do you help them manage their emotions and their mindset when they're in those spaces?
That's a good question. Again, I think a lot of it, like you mentioned, is life is hard. Life is going to happen at you and to you sometimes, and it's not going to really kind of follow any kind of pattern, and it's going to be chaotic. And I think, again, for me, a lot of times we do work with like goal setting, because if you're just, it's very easy to get lost, especially if you deal with depression or anxiety or any other kind of diagnosis, or even if you don't, just in general, it's easy to feel really untethered, and feel like you're kind of just floating. And so any way that you can ground yourself, like that's a big thing. A lot of times when working with clients is like we work on breathing techniques or like little grounding techniques, things to put them in the present moment, and out of their head, but like more in the present moment of the space that they're in. And then from there, once they can kind of get themselves to a place where, okay, I'm grounded, I'm at a baseline. Okay, now let's have those rational conversations of like, what can you do? Like what are some things like problem solving and like, really trying to start to take action steps and SMART goals and all those kinds of things that can help. Because, when you're struggling, you have to realize that every single emotion that you feel is completely valid. It's completely valid. Period. That being said, they can also be irrational. So it's like, like you said, when people are feeling these kind of emotions, sure, acknowledge them, sit with them, like acknowledge the fact that I'm angry right now, and just sit with that for a second, and then ask yourself, why am I angry? Like start understanding maybe what is this underlying thing, and a lot of times like anger, especially, we talk a lot about like I used to teach this parenting class in jail, and one of the things that I would teach like incarcerated individuals, we would talk about like secondary emotions, and we would talk about like how like anger is a secondary emotion. That in reality, it's not really an emotion. It's just like you're angry because of something, So like there's something, usually, what is it, and trying to understand your feelings and your emotions. And one of the things that we used to do in the beginning that I thought was kind of hokey, but ended up being really, really beneficial, was we would give them we would start every day. We would do a guided meditation and a grounding meditation technique, and we would start the class with that. Then we would have check-ins, and they would have a piece of paper with a bunch of cartoon faces on it with the emotion written underneath, and say, how are we feeling today? And they would, kind of point. And, again, when I saw that, I'm thinking to myself, you expect me to walk into a jail and just give a cartoon sheet of paper over to people and say, let's talk about our emotions. I'm like, I don't know about this. Because this was like years ago. This was when I first started in nonprofit, and I wasn't a clinician or anything. And I thought, well, this is going to either go really well or really bad. And what's interesting is it was the grounding techniques, like the meditation and the emotion work, were some of the favorite work that everyone had. And what was really fascinating was one of the guys who was older, and he's like in his 50s, was speaking up one day and said he really enjoyed that part because for most of his life, or all of his life, he really only knew two emotions. I'm either angry or I'm not angry. And that's it. And that's all he knew. And when he looked at this sheet of paper, it blew his mind as to all the things that you could feel and all that, and putting words to your emotions and the ways you feel. And we had tons of success with that program in the local detention center here in Harford County in Maryland. And like across the board, we had correctional officers that bought into it, that would tell people about it because there were lower incident rates with incarcerated individuals. We had individuals who were, not getting into fights and were able to de-escalate certain situations because of all the things they were learning in the class. So it was like people started interacting with each other better. People started interacting with staff and correctional COs better, and interacting with like their probation and parole officers afterward better. So it was tons of really great things. And I'll be honest, I really missed that work, and I really enjoyed it. It was when COVID hit, obviously they, shut down all that kind of stuff, and it hasn't really kind of kicking it back off just yet. But, yeah, I think a lot of times it's again, emotions are very real. They can cause like physiological, like changes in your body. Right. So if anyone says anxiety is not real, but it can make you feel like you're having a heart attack, and that, that feels pretty real. And that to me, it's just understanding your emotions, sitting with your emotions, and then acknowledging what can you do when that comes up. So having a game plan for the next time.